there's quite a significant amount of research that now says that multitasking isn't a thing. What happens is we see switching between tasks. There's something called the cost switch effect. It takes away almost like a drag in your cognitive ability to focus because your brain is having to reorientate itself. That takes up a toll and it contributes to cognitive fatigue, which also has an effect on sort of emotional well-being as well.
Hello and welcome to the Knowness podcast, the vault of knowledge. Another week, another Knowness podcast. Join us as we talk to Abi Edmunds, the CEO of Social Media Resilience. Empowerment is a very big word, and we'll be discussing it through the lens of social media and technology usage. So thank you and join us for this week's episode. Okay, so would you like to just introduce yourself?
So my name's Abi Edmunds. I'm the founder of Social Media Resilience, and my background is in physiotherapy, but I have progressed into this nice diverse portfolio of working as a digital wellbeing specialist, tiny bit of physio, clinical work still going, and building my business, Social Media Resilience.
Just start off, really basic. Tell us a bit more about that, about the Social Media Resilience.
It's a training company looking at the negative impacts of social media and digital devices. At the moment, I'm mostly working in schools with this and in the charity sector. So helping people navigate well-being online and also how to navigate hostile interactions online. In a lot more people navigating difficult communications as so members of organisations sort of navigating that on behalf of their organisation, but then dealing with quite difficult interactions online. So training runs from sort of engaging with the employees in the first instance, helping them understand what the problems are, and then designing training, delivering that to improve overall digital wellbeing culture within the company and schools, of course.
And it's interesting you mentioned schools because, growing up, for me particularly, and for a lot of people I can imagine, there's not really any guidance of social media. It's one of those things where technology has advanced so rapidly. We're kind of thrown into this world and we're forced to kind of navigate it ourselves. And for some people, it doesn't really work out as well. So can you tell us a bit more about that? What kind of, examples are there out there where things can go wrong?
Well, I think mental health is one of the biggest factors, and what the sort of government is looking at and what policy is increasingly looking at is changing the regulations around how smartphones are used for young people. Because although research has taken its time to catch up in terms of the direct causal link between social media contributing and causing poor mental health, there is enough sort of correlating evidence from the research over a long period of time that we want to do something about it now, especially in the UK, and the US is sort of leading with that, and Australia as well recently. So, and that's a really interesting we're at the cusp of it in terms of legislation being changing that in the UK as well. But some of the practical things in terms of issues within school, a lot of young people are dealing with more and more violent content, harmful content, content that's related to body dysmorphia that links into sort of eating disorders. And then the constant barrage of information and highly sensationalized and emotional information as well, I think is a problem that I'm seeing in schools in particular. And teachers already have a significant amount of challenges that they're navigating with young people. Then it's important, and you've got your safeguarding challenges, but then how do you help young people navigate social media in a way that helps them progress through key developmental stages from young child through to sort of teenager into adulthood in a way that helps them flourish as an individual whilst also navigating the online world. So that's what I look at, and how I come into it is I help young people navigate that, and I help teachers navigate that and give them the tools and the structure to talk about it as well. And almost a lot of my work tends to be around, we know what the problems are, and schools will tell me the problems. They've got the problems coming out their ears with it. And what I do is I frame the knowledge and the research and the understanding into practical frameworks that helps them go away with something. We're all with the view of positive behavior change, and with positive behavior change, looking at sort of longevity of that and making consistent habits all the way through sort of teenage years, and spotting difficult habits and then working to change that as well.
But something that I've never really, come across at all, the idea of actually creating frameworks and creating something solid and introducing it to these schools and these communities. Which is very new. Like I've never, even like considered something like that. But I do think it's really important because, like you said, when it comes to the amount of damaging content you can see online, like body dysmorphia and so on, when I stop to think about it, it's kind of scary because when it comes to the online world, social media, when you really think about it, there's so much, like it's mind blowing. If I wanted to learn about ancient Greek kings or about space exploration, there's so much out there, so much positive things you can learn about. But at the same time, there's almost infinite amount of negative content that we can consume. So I guess it's just kind of scary, like seeing it like that.
It's interesting because the more I've spent time sort of in this area, and I'll tell you about how I ended up in this area in a bit, I'm sure. But the more we talk about the attention economy, which is sort of this surplus of information just at our fingertips, just like that. Yeah. And attention is our finite resource. We can only focus our attention on one thing at a time.
Exactly.
And there's quite a significant amount of research that now says that multitasking isn't a thing. So we can't really multitask in the way that people think that we're multitasking. And what happens is we see sort of switching between tasks. So for example, if you've got your screen up in front of you when you're at work and you've got your mobile phone on your desk and you're switching between the two, there's something called the cost switch effect, where basically it takes away a cognitive, almost like a drag in your cognitive ability to focus because your brain is having to reorientate itself.
I see. Okay. And so it's not doing two things at once. It's switching from one thing to another thing.
Gotcha. Exactly. And that takes up a toll and it contributes to cognitive fatigue. And then if we look at the sorts of content that we're looking at, that has a sort of an effect on some of the reward systems in the pathway in the brain, which also has an effect on sort of emotional well-being as well. And the reason I bring that up is because there's now more sort of talk around the attention economy moving into this addiction economy where technology is not only sort of capturing our attention, but everything is vying to create a habitual reuse of technology, social media, apps and things. And with that, that's a real problem if we start to sort of hypothesize where that's going to go over the next 5 years. And Scott Galloway recently talked about it on his podcast that we've actually gone from this attention economy into the addiction economy.
Gotcha, yeah.
Where technology and social media is habitually drawing us back into it.
It's designed to keep you looped in and stuck in. And like with stuff like TikTok is like the classic example of the short, 2 minute, 1 minute clips. And you're stuck in this loop where you're just scrolling and scrolling and scrolling
and like doom scrolling and how that impacts us as well. But I think it's really interesting to think about sort of the structural impact of this on our society and how many people are doing this. And we've normalized this sort of in technology throughout our lives. I'll give you an example of this. I was recently in Rome and I decided to go out and explore Rome. So basically on my own. And I walked past the Trevi Fountain and, this beautiful piece of architecture from history, and you're in Rome and it's amazing. And people are stood around the Trevi Fountain clamoring with their phones, like reaching up, trying to get a photo of it. You would see them one at a time, sort of going in front of the Trevi Fountain, turning around and taking a selfie. And I was like, that's so interesting. And what I decided to do the following day is I went out without a phone. And so I, I was exploring around and I went to the Colosseum and then I went into the Forum and I said to them, can I please have an audio tour? And they're like, well, if you just download the app. And I was like, well, I don't have an app. I don't have a phone on me. And I was like, is there no audio tour that I can purchase and use to take around? And they're like, no, you have to have the app. You have
to have the phone,
And that's a really good example of something called entanglement, where we've got to a point in our society where technology is so integrated within society that it's, if you choose to, opt out at any point, it's impossible.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's a really interesting and, quite a challenging and complex problem when we think about sort of the way our society is being built up and then the effect that this is having at different levels of society.
It reminds me of this. I don't know if you've seen them, but like how certain restaurants, they don't have physical menu. It's like a QR code menu. So you have to literally scan a QR code to get the menu. So if you don't have a phone, what are you going to do?
What are you going to do?
Exactly. Yeah. But it's really interesting to say, there's a lot of examples as well of how, I guess, social media, if we talk through the lens of people who have like neurodivergent problems as well, how social media kind of weaponizes that. So with people with ADHD, for example, in the context of schools, there are a lot of students who have it undiagnosed. And so when they're on TikTok and they rely on that short-term gratification, these apps and these forms of social media really kind of weaponize that.
What do you mean by weaponize?
So they kind of utilize that. So I'll give you an example. It's emergence of like this short form content. So you know how before it was just TikTok that used to do it. Now there's Instagram Reels, Facebook's got it, YouTube's got it, YouTube Shorts. And I think it utilizes, kind of weaponizes how a lot of people prefer that and how they have like a short attention span. And they use it to like increase this amount of content and to prioritize that.
Well, I think that's quite an interesting one if we think about content and neurodiversity with that, and how actually through content people have gained better language for understanding some problems. But and that in and of itself is good. But then I think what you're saying, and I think that's the real challenge, is the way that the content stimulates the habitual response, and then the change in our attention is quite problematic, and especially for those who have already got attention deficit challenges. And that's what we see. Well, interestingly, with there's a little bit of research. I can't remember who it is off the top of my head, but with the information overload of social media, we actually see an increase in neuronal activity. So the way that our brain creates sort of a shifting between different things, it almost sort of creates it itself as a result of the information overload. Gloria Mark is a researcher on this, on attention, and she talks about how once your brain has been conditioned to expect a shift in content or a new bit of information, your brain essentially recreates that stimulus in and of itself without the stimulus being there. So a good example of this is when you've got your phone in your pockets and you get phantom vibration syndrome. You pick it up and you think you've had a notification, but there's nothing there. Because your brain is creating that distraction because it's been so habitually conditioned for it. And that's a problem because, if I were to ask you when was the last time you sat and focused on a piece of work, just on one piece of work for the last hour, for an hour, I can think of my times, but I've been focusing on this recently. But if I ask most people within an organization, definitely within schools, when was the last time you focused on a piece of content for an hour? Most people can't think of it. Which is crazy to really think about. Like the idea of me sitting down, or let's say me taking a trip to the library, but like you said, like when we had the holiday without my phone, and to just go and just because I'm going to the library to do work, I don't really need my phone. But the idea of it, I don't think I'd be able to do that. To just go and just focus on the work and just an example as well, like I can think of is when I was in Lyon in France, and I remember I was only there for one day, so I literally had to just hop from place to place to place to place. And by the end of the day, I realized all I really did that day was I'd go to a really nice place, I'd snap a few photos, done. On to the next. Snap a few photos, done. I'm not really there, do you know what I mean? Yeah.
And when you look back at moments like that, you start to realize how much technology and social media's got a grip on our lives.
Yeah. So actually the reason that I did that experiment in Rome this time is because the time that I'd been before, it was about 3 years ago, I had that experience of just going around all the sites and I was just snapping.
And then it's like, it's taken off, so it's done.
Exactly. And I put little markers on my Google Maps.
Yeah, the exact same thing.
So I
was planning out my route and everything.
To all these places. But I was actually reflecting on that though, because I was looking, I'm in the process of writing a blog piece about it because I was looking at how memory changes when we're experiencing the world through our phone. And if we think about how memory is constructed and how memories are made, the layers of sensory experience are required to have a really full memory. And if you think about sort of key moments that are really stand out in your memory, whatever it is, you might notice that there's sort of an emotional impact with it, and there's usually sort of a high emotional experience with it. And there's usually lots of sort of sensory experience, so thinking sort of sight, sound, feelings, hearing, taste, that sort of thing. And when you're consuming your world through your phone, you completely reduce down your focus into this one point of contact, and to the exclusion sometimes of all the other stimulus around you. And there is, again, some research on this, and about how phone use is impacting sort of memory and and how we recall information, because essentially when you're doing that, you're using your phone as an external memory drive for your brain. So there's no reason for the brain to take in so much sensory stimulus,
because you're relying on the phone to do it. Yeah, so you can just check the photos afterwards. Or
exactly.
Yeah, because that reminds me as well of, I was in I think Madeira, and there's like a really tall like kind of viewpoint. And when I was there, my phone wasn't working. It was out of battery, so I couldn't use it. And I remember having such a conflicting feeling, because on one hand, I loved the experience. It was so nice being there, taking in the view, just being with friends and just taking some time to myself, just to sit and look around. But I also felt like I was like, there's something missing, I felt uncomfortable. I felt like, I'm not really enjoying this moment to the very best, because I don't have my phone with me to record it, take the pictures. Do you know what I mean? But in reality, like, being there was amazing. And I think that's the problem that, you speak about, how it's like, we're too used to this as like a society. And because everyone's doing it, it doesn't really feel wrong.
Well, it's normalized. It's how we live our life, isn't it?
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, I know. I think about that quite a lot, and what we're going to see over the next sort of 10 years with it. And I think we're already starting to see how culture is having a bit of a reaction to it. Say a good example is like your run clubs is a nice example of it, where in response to, say, online dating culture with Tinder and Bumble and Hinge and things, now we're starting to see this sort of in-person, fitness inspired experience where you're meeting with people in face to face. And I think we'll start to see more and more of this sort of a reactionary but designed cultural experiences around the exclusion of phones. And there's a couple of other sort of experiences you can have with that. And I think that's a good thing, really. I think it's a good thing to create those boundaries and to have those experiences, and to remember, an alternative to being fully consumed by your phone all the time. Exactly.
And actually, like, kind of going back to like what makes us human, those actual interactions, being with people. And again, like you said, when you look at it like externally, and you realize how for thousands and thousands of years this wasn't a problem, and now all of a sudden it's kind of exploded, and it's a massive part of our lives. I think when I take that step back and look at it, it's kind of like mind blowing in a way. It's kind of surreal. But we don't even like question it or think about it. It's just like how life is. It's just normal.
Yeah.
But I guess with your startup, you kind of breaking that down a little bit and challenging it.
I mean, it's such a big conversation, really. I never feel like I've got enough time to give any answers with it. But my social media resilience, we focus very much on understanding these problems, looking at what the research is, and then creating really clear frameworks for change. And my background has always been in behavior change. So I started in fitness. I trained as a behavior change coach when I was 18, and then have sort of gone through different trainings. I trained as a physiotherapist, and then I became interested in the impact of social media on health communications. And that's how I've sort of built up the wealth of knowledge around it. And what I really focus on is autonomous self-change, because lots of the research that looks at behavior change, it has to be self-motivated and self-driven.
I think from just to interrupt you quickly, I think something I saw with my own like personal experience with that is about the difference between external versus internal motivation. So if you take the example of someone who is, I don't remember the exact example, but let's say someone who has a smoking problem and they keep smoking, but then one day they have a heart attack and they stop smoking. But then after a while, you'll find that they continue again, because that's an external motivation. It's not something that's sustainable. Whereas an internal one would be something like they recognize the long-term implications of it. They look at the discussions with family, kind of stuff like that. I don't remember exactly what it was, but it just kind of highlights the difference between those two. And I think maybe it's similar with social media change as well, because with a lot of students, it's because their mom will tell them to stop, or basic external reasons that don't have much weight or value.
Yeah, and that in and of itself is an interesting point, because although somebody would want to stop, if they do develop that understanding of, I think this is really bad for me, or I want to use it in moderation, the way that social media in particular is designed is it's designed to stimulate that habitual use again, which does create a really challenging problem. So we have to look at really clear boundaries of intervention with it. And understand what are the practical things that you can do day to day to make a difference with it. Things like grayscale on the phone to change the color and to filter it out. That's a really nice one, because it changes the experience of the vibrancy of the phone.
Mm-hmm.
Making sure somebody understands that sleep is so important in terms of mental health, learning, growth, reflection. All sleep is so important, and then important for physical health as well, which I haven't touched on there. But so helping them understand that social media use late at night and through the day leading up to your bedtime has an impact on your sleep quality and your quantity. And if you add that up over weeks and months, no wonder people are feeling a bit depressed because they're not getting enough sleep.
Exactly. And has a massive impact on your mental health.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, and helping somebody sort of play through those scenarios of, well, what is it that you want in life and how is this stopping you? And I think, again, like if people are sort of thinking about this themselves, it's looking at that time and looking at your life as an experience, the one life that you get, and asking yourself, well, am I going to spend it on a screen scrolling? What?
Yeah, when you view it from that like frame,
yeah,
it's not really a good frame. Yeah.
So that's, and helping people understand that is how I spend most of my time, really.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. And it reminds me of that book. It's a really famous book, Atomic Habits, and it kind of touches on the different ways, and I'm sure it's like very relevant to like the kind of stuff that you do. So it just reminded me a bit about that. But I want to ask you another question as well, and it kind of goes back right to the beginning, which is what motivated you. I know you touched on it slightly about how you're very interested in like behavioral change, but what was it that inspired you to start this startup journey?
So I always knew that I wanted a business, even from when I was a little girl. I had my first business. I had rabbits that I basically I grew a rabbit empire. Oh, is it? And I sold them when I was 6. And then, 6. So I mean, I started young in terms of business, and all through my sort of teenage years, I knew very clearly that I wanted to do something that was going to create a lot of impact. But I didn't know what that was.
It's not like a rabbit factory. It's like something big.
Rabbit factory.
Something bigger.
I think my parents would have, kicked me out before then. But and that started. So that sort of drive for business was really quite clear, and I knew that through my teenage years. And unfortunately, I didn't really have the support or the structure or the understanding for learning to know how to build the skill set, which is actually why I love what you guys do here at Knowness, because you sort of break down those barriers of that. And so I went into studying behavior change coaching. It's one of the things. I went to uni for the first time, studying sport and exercise science and material science. I didn't know what I wanted to do after that. Didn't want to get a job. Wanted to do sort of fitness. Ended up becoming a physio. Yeah. And actually, my physio journey was quite a difficult one, because I actually dropped out of my physio degree just at the point of getting really interested in this subject in particular. And at that time, I was looking at, as I mentioned, health communications and how they're being communicated via social media. And this was in 2016, 2017. And unfortunately, I was in a very challenging and abusive relationship at the time. So dropped out of degree, stopped my sort of research aspiration and where I wanted to go with my career. And I only mention that because it is quite important to my origin story in terms of actually getting to business.
The backstory,
Exactly. And with sort of 2020, that had ended, thank goodness. And that point, I went back to university and completed my physio degree, which was incredible in of itself at the time. And I got reinterested in this subject, and I sort of reclaimed all of my interests and my passions that had been
kind of fought to like get it all
away.
Back.
And with that sort of journey, the last 5 years in particular, since then, has been a real sort of crafting of who I am, of my interest in this subject and my passion around it. And I think it had led me to a point where I just pulled everything together. I was like, I can't not do something about this. And, the experiences that I've had really did challenge me in that sense. And I was so proud to be able to stand up and say that, like, I can live my life freely now. It's like, well, I want to be able to deliver something of impact that other people can, put their head above the parapet of their phones and go, I want to live my life in this way.
To kind of reclaim it for yourself.
And
this would make such like a good like origin story movie. We got a producer to produce it.
A superhero or a villain.
But no, that's amazing. I think I can see like where a lot of this passion comes from, And I think you're certainly challenging. It definitely wouldn't be a villain movie. I think you're challenging it in the best direction possible, and to help other people share that experience as well.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it was interesting because I was obviously reflecting on it, of my journey. And I think I was in a school recently in Birmingham delivering, and I stood up at the front of the classroom. And at the end, when they were doing sort of a group activity and things, one of the kids said to me, he was like, you seem really confident when you're standing up there. How do you do it? And I said to him, well, it's taken me time to get here. Yeah. And if you'd known me sort of 3-4 years before, like, I couldn't have stood up in front of a classroom of kids. Now I do it regularly, I do it every week. Yeah, and that's my day job.
It's just
now.
Normal now, yeah.
And I think there was just something in me that just kept going, in terms of, like, I know at the core of what I want, business, entrepreneurship, that's who I am, and I just kept going for it. And the story we create around it, the business I'm creating, it just so happens that it's pulling together all my skill set. I was going to say, it's like bringing everything
together into one.
Yeah. So crafting it with love and perseverance and sometimes tears.
Honestly, it's beautiful, I guess, in that sense, bringing it all together. And one thing, because you mentioned schools and social media, one thing that's very that's been topical recently is that show Adolescence, which I'm not sure if have you seen it?
I have seen it.
Yeah. So what's the kind of thoughts on, from your lens, from your perspective, your thoughts on that show and its portrayal of social media?
I think it's wise for people to remember that it's a drama.
Okay,
My initial concerns, have you seen it?
I've seen it, yeah.
What was your reaction to it? What was your feeling when you watched it?
I think it was very, with me and my background of medicine, I've got a very big interest in psychiatry. So I really liked the episode, the third one, where they kind of delve into, I guess, a bit of like the psychological side of things. But I think for me, I don't know, it was difficult to fully understand, the person's like mentality and whatnot, just because I hadn't been in that kind of space or with people who've had that kind of mentality. So it was very difficult for me. It was a very fresh perspective on that kind of sort of issue. So I was more interested on the third episode part of it.
And that was a very interesting episode.
Yeah,
I think. Stephen Graham, who... he
was a fantastic...
he was fantastic. Yeah. I think when he was sort of sculpting it, he very much wanted to look at the parents' experience of that.
Yeah, which is really brutal.
Really, horrific. Yeah. And my experience of watching that is that I felt scared, is how I felt. And
it is really scary.
And with all the knowledge that I've sort of got around social media and the impact and how it's impacting people, and in those conversations, I was like, if I was a parent, and if I was a parent watching this, I would be absolutely petrified.
Yeah, man, because you know what it's like, if he didn't, commit that act, then everything would have still been the same. He would have had that same mentality. Yeah. Who knows? Maybe he would have gone on to do worse things, or do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's that kind of like, I guess, that hidden side of things. And they lived together. They were in the same room, same house, and they just had no idea.
Yeah.
Just terrifying.
And I think that with that, my concern is that people have it's getting a lot of attention in media for different reasons. Keir Starmer has mentioned it a couple of times, referring to it as a documentary and not a drama, which sort of adds to my feeling that I think people will take that and run with it and start getting really, really scared about already quite a big and challenging problem, which is social media and sort of harmful content online. And what are their son or their young girl, how are they spending their time? So there's a whole sort of secret language that, parents don't understand. And I was listening to a PM show a couple of weeks ago, and there was a headmistress of an all boys school. I think it's down in Fulham. And she said in response to it that most young men, most young boys are polite, respectful, kind young men. And my concern is that, parents will be watching this and they'll be thinking, oh my gosh, there's this awful subculture online, and it's converting young men into these really horrible misogynistic people. And the reality is that, young people are smart. They know what they're looking at. They know roughly what's right and wrong with it, and they're probably getting some support around this anyway in schools, because there is a good curriculum around online safety, and lots of schools do a lot of things with this. And so my feelings about the show is that it's a piece of interesting dramatization.
Exactly, yeah.
In the current climate at the moment, it's been sort of pulled out of that, and I think that's a worry. For
I think
the impact of it.
Yeah, and I guess it's created this this culture of fear, this unfair culture of fear, which doesn't really have any benefit, other than creating more clicks on these different news websites and so on. But but like I said, I think it's it should be seen as a dramatization, and not as like a documentary or or a warning or a rule book. Yeah. But it's just interesting. So that's a lot on the school side of things. So how does it? What's your kind of role when it comes to companies and talk to us a bit about that.
So actually, Social Media Resilience is soon to be launching a parent company where I'll be talking about sort of the broad scope of digital wellbeing, AI within companies as well. And with that, a look at how digital wellbeing, so much of us are operating in hybrid or remote working situations, how companies can reduce friction when it comes to, multitasking online. So there's a really nice review from Harvard Business Review that says that on average, the average worker toggles between apps on their screen 1,200 times a day.
Yeah, that's a lot. Yeah.
It's a lot.
That's an insane amount.
Yeah. And that doesn't even count in sort of social media use.
Yeah.
Social media use on average in the working day, and everybody does it, but 92% of people are using social media at some point within their working day.
Yeah.
Fair enough. But you think how much time you're having to switch between.
And it's like you said, switching those different mindsets,
Exactly. Yeah. And that has, if we think about businesses, it has a toll on well-being for people. It starts to see a blur of work-life balance. We start to see a loss in, focus, the ability to read it.
The cognitive fatigue is what you mentioned.
Cognitive fatigue, yeah. And, for organizations who are trying to, improve revenue, improve productivity, that has an impact on your bottom line with that as well. We see rise of burnout, rise of stress, absenteeism, all these things that cost companies money. So what I do with companies, depending on what stream of the business they're interested in, is I build up a framework for them where we look at their digital wellbeing culture. And so specifically, we start off with a foundation of communication and good communication that leads into a digital wellbeing culture and a framework for that. And what we see is then we link that into psychological safety, and then we link that into team flow and how in a hybrid and distributed environment, teams can still work together really, really well and create that sort of innovation and creativity without getting that overwhelm, without getting that impact on their cognitive abilities to perform for themselves. And overall, that looks at productivity, but we see a nice big boost in how people feel when they're at work. So they're not so overwhelmed anymore with all of these different things. So working with that, that's the goal of the business, of starting to work with a few companies with that, which is fun. And then there's the other side of it as well, which actually looks at training around navigating that hostile interaction for people. So thinking more sort of your comms and your digital comms for companies and charities in particular with that. So it's really broad, very broad.
It seems like a lot of work to just to start and to get going on. I think, like I said, it's the first time I've heard of something like this before. So there's definitely there's a lot of there's a lot of places that this can go from my limited understanding. But that's the next question I want to ask you. What's your kind of future plans, future scope, future vision?
Yeah. So Social Media Resilience will remain, and that will be focused on the education sector and charities. And my new business will basically incorporate all of that and look at digital wellbeing across the board. We're looking at consultancy, training, and then ongoing training to build sort of this ongoing digital wellbeing culture. And with that, grow the business, make it bigger, make it better, become the digital wellbeing market in the UK, then go overseas. So that's the big vision. So scaling quickly is the goal. So all my own practices that I'm teaching other people are going to be applied as best I can. But we know as entrepreneurs, we you're always working.
Exactly. There's no end goal. It's just constant work. But I think, like you said, I guess building those frameworks as well, developing them, making them better. Because, like I said, growing up, we didn't have anything like that. I mean, I say it like it was 20 years ago. It was literally 5-10 years ago. But I think it's really interesting that that's something now that's coming in place. When it comes to approaching schools and having those discussions, what are the main barriers you faced, would you say?
I think mostly it's trust in terms of, knowing me as a company and knowing what I do. That gets easier and easier there, and it has been getting much easier. I think then, there are lots of organizations that are doing good work with this, and it just depends on their time and their ability to engage with the organization at the right time. The biggest challenge that I see for schools is that there's never enough time for them, though. There's never enough time to sort of sit down, and if you're lucky, you've got somebody dedicated to this. Most of the time that's not the case, and it's a case of just somebody's been assigned to do something for a wellbeing week or an education week or the awareness day.
A morning assembly or something.
Exactly.
And then that's it. It's not really something that's sustainable or built into the curriculum. But I guess it's understandable given the time constraints and how much they have to shift their focus on other things as well. But I think I can imagine that's a big challenge, balancing that. And what would you say would be the current challenges that you faced with the workplace and that side of things?
Very similar, actually. It's helping people understand that there might be a problem with digital wellbeing because, post-COVID, during COVID, post-COVID, everybody sort of went out into these hybrid or remote working situations. And lots of people are really happy there, and that's a good thing, and it works really, really well. And I think a similar sort of thing is where we're progressing, we're including more tools, we're including more platforms of sort of progression and advancement, and AIs now over the last sort of, however long it's been over the last year or so, it's been the big thing that companies are all in a race to integrate it. And with that, if you come along and you're pitching, well, actually, you need to be thinking about digital wellbeing. Sometimes the initial response is, well, I'm okay. I'm actually all right as I am. Especially from an employee perspective. If you mention productivity to a sort of a colleague in a company, it's well, I am productive. The thing is that most people are productive. Most people work really, really well at home when they've got more freedom and they've got sort of their autonomy to manage their time. But we look at that specific sort of the drag that happens in between toggling and how to streamline culture and how to streamline conditions and communications to enable a flourishing business culture, creativity and innovation. And, when you're talking to business owners and your key decision makers within companies, that's the thing that we're looking at with that is yes, looking at the productivity for them, but for the employees, we're looking at feeling better at the end of the workday so that you're not completely fatigued and you're not done. And then you go on your social media and you're just scrolling for the rest of the night.
Draining yourself out even further. And then you get the bad sleep as well, which then affects the next day. And then it's the next day, you see the accumulating toll on it. So it's sort of that balance of, yes, this is a productivity thing, but this is so much a well-being thing. And companies, I think, have a really interesting space in where we're at now in our economy, where they can lead on this and they can really sort of pioneer this within the culture in the UK in particular, where if they do something about it, they're going to be doing something good about it, and they're going to be seen to be doing something good as well. And that'll filter down to parents, that'll filter down to kids. And so from that side of things, the corporate side of the business is really important because it's another access point for me to, make impact to young people as well with this. You build workplace culture in really early on with digital practices. Hopefully that will, help all the generations as they come through the companies. Yeah. And I think over time, this slowly starts to become the norm and more normalized. Because, when I was in school and stuff, this whole idea of ethical social media usage and whatnot, it wasn't really a prominent thing. But over time, it's become more and more common, more and more acceptable. And hopefully it's the same with this kind of stuff as well. Hopefully, again, yours takes off to be the number one. But for our general like audience members, what would your kind of like advice be when it comes to this side of things? So ethical social media usage, and productivity, that side of things. Just general pieces of advice, would you say? But the most
general
important
pieces of advice. Well, the biggest
it's a very broad question.
The biggest thing in the first instance is, humans have a fantastic ability to reflect.
Yeah.
Take a step back, reflect on where your habits are going. And then start to ask yourself, well, what's the intention for my use of technology when it comes to social media, when it comes to AI, and at what cost? And I think that's the thing is yes, I might be intentional about this, but at what cost? And that's the thing that if we start thinking about it, we start assessing it and looking at it, and sort of flipping back around to the behavior change, it's the individual decision that somebody has to make and understand for themselves to find what is the balance of technology, what is the benefits of technology, and what's the cost, what's the drawback. And that's digital wellbeing. And it's like, if we think across the years of how healthcare has developed in terms of nutrition and dietary advice, most people have a general understanding of what's good and bad in terms of food now, in terms of what we're consuming. We've got more and more sort of signs about that in the way we consume food and things. And increasingly so, we're seeing the environment where people are starting to get messages around this, but you still have to have a reflective sort of experience of going, well, what's good for me? How am I being intentional? And how am I using social media technology, and at what cost? What's the risk of this? And it might just be a simple answer of like, oh, I'm losing time, quality time with my friends, my family, my kids. And if you add that up over a week, a month, a year, what's the impact of that?
Exactly. Yeah. I think that's a really big thing. Just, understanding why, why should I change? Because I think from my own personal experience, just sitting down and just scrolling, I do enjoy it. You do gain enjoyment from it. But then you realize, in the past hour, I could have read a book, I could have, and I could have gained so much more benefit from that. Which kind of leads me on to my next question a little bit. We can see you've had like a remarkable journey, and you've certainly gained a lot of both knowledge and experience around this subject. So have you ever considered like, writing a book, maybe?
Yes. Yeah. I'm in the process of starting to write a book. So my first step is I'm just trying to get more blog content out. Talking about the AI, and it's very easy to write content now with AI. And
exactly. Yeah.
I'm working on building a skill of trying to just get my thoughts down on paper without sort of interrupting inputs, because we can consume.
Yeah.
But that knowledge and that sort of generation of knowledge, it happens in that reflective sort of process of going through some of the growing pains of doing that. So I'm actually grappling with that at the moment.
That initial phase.
So that's quite interesting. I've got a very small book about a digital detox, which is available. It's a freebie, so that is available.
Is that on like Amazon and stuff?
No, it's just via my website at the moment.
Okay, what's the name of the website? You can give it a little
socialmediaresilience.co.uk.
Socialmediaresilience.co.uk. So guys, check this out. So I was like, I feel like that would be really interesting, just to have something like that to read. Because in my situation, for example, I'm not in a school or in like a workplace, but it's still a subject I find really interesting to read on about. And there isn't like loads out there at the moment.
What sort of things would you want to know?
So I think for me, it's just, I think it's developing my own insight and my own reflection. And what that means is, if I gain a better understanding of why it's so harmful, I think that would give me more of a motivation to, to work on it a little bit more, and to work on how I use social media and technology in general. Just understanding the negative impacts of it. So that's, and just to develop my own personal insights. And then also just learning more about, different ways to combat that. Like you mentioned as well, the grayscale on your phone. That's something very small, but that can make a massive impact. Another thing as well you mentioned is the different mindsets, which is how we can't really multitask, but instead we're forcing our brains to just change. That's another big thing as well, because I think with that mindset and that viewing it in that frame makes me less, makes me more cautious about doing that, and I guess tiring my brain out.
That reminds me actually of the skill of critical thinking. So lots of my education workshops have talked about critical thinking, and when you go through education, you go through university, you get layered on this experience of learning how to think critically about what you're consuming. And I think in particular with AI, what we're seeing is this incredible accessibility to, instantaneous, more so than what Google was having, instantaneous information and solutions. And young people, that they're all very, very resourceful in terms of finding solutions. But what we'll see is like a degradation of the ability to think critically.
Yeah.
And if we're not careful in sort of ages from 11 through to sort of 18, when that is a really important part of the brain to sort of develop and go through and grow, the risk is that people don't develop those skills. And so for me, a little bit older than that, I had the really great experience of growing up and not with social media. And I think now how grateful I am that I was able to sort of develop some of that ability to think critically about things without social media and without AI instantaneously sort of giving me that stimulus and giving me that solution. And, coming back to your point about finding the internal motivation, I think that the thing that sort of almost makes me extremely passionate about this is that our ability as humans and individuals to think critically, to be able to reflect in that same breath is so precious. And when you're scrolling, you're giving away your attention, and you're potentially giving away your ability to do that because you're consuming things so quickly in an overload and in emotional experiences. That's important. If you think about your career, if anybody listening to this thinks about their career and the way they want to navigate life, your ability to think smartly and from different perspectives and to bring ideas and generate knowledge in your own way together, that's so precious. And we're just wasting it away by just on social media and scrolling all the time.
Exactly. I mean, if I just give the example of like an hour ago, it's not something I really knew much about or really cared about, but even from this simple conversation, that's something I've gained a much more, bigger appreciation of, and it's like I said, it's scary how, a couple of years ago, when ChatGPT didn't exist, we had to actually go out there and find information out for ourselves and stuff like that. Whereas now, especially the students, they just type one thing and that's it, done. And if they had like homework, type one thing, copy paste, done. Not one single critical thinking.
What are you learning there?
Exactly. Yeah. At that point, it's just
what life are you set? You're setting yourself up to be a ChatGPT technician for a career.
Exactly.
And there are sort of your prompt engineers and things, but that again requires a level of sort of understanding of things. But what are you setting yourself up for in life if you don't have to grapple with the challenge of learning something and experiencing sort of the searching with that, because that's the skill of it. And I think it's really scary. It's a scary future.
Yeah, exactly. Because like I said, this is new. We don't know what the next generation of students will be like if they continue down this kind of pathway of going to school without really going to school, kind of thing.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, it is really scary. But that's why, we have people like you here to hopefully combat that. Or maybe to potentially, with schools to help students find a way to use ChatGPT, but in a manner that's more that utilizes their critical thinking skills. I don't know how that would turn out or how that would look like.
Well, I mean, simply it's going online and being with the purpose of I'm going to assess this with a critical lens on it and exploring that and going through the steps of it. I mean, when I studied that, it's critical thinking is a skill, isn't it? It's the way that we think about something. But I think universities do this particularly well in our education system, is that they give you formats to sort of go away and grapple with the research and understand it from different viewpoints and perspectives and pull together critical viewpoints on it. And that, I can't remember what I was going with that one.
I guess that's one way of developing critical thinking skills, despite, people, what's it called? The usage of ChatGPT and stuff like that. Because if you have that kind of framework, you're still utilizing those critical thinking.
Yeah. So, and
that's what you were going
and
for.
Looking at, so the use of ChatGPT is, get the response from it and then, assess that with a viewpoint to go through the sort of into the depth of it rather than just assuming and taking that as sort of face value, because it can be an incredible learning tool. Like I use a Google Notepad or notebook, what it is, to sort of expedite the research that I do. But that doesn't mean that I take everything at face value. It means that it's a tool for going deeper into the research and to looking and to, dissecting the research in a different way. But I already knew how to do that with the research through a university career. And I'm very privileged that I've had that.
Yeah.
For young people, they're taught content and information, for the purpose of our education system. But we need to be able to give them sort of the tools and the experiences to grapple with that information in a way that develops that thinking skill, that a way to generate their own thoughts about something. Yeah. And so much of it is, I teach this framework in school, but the final point of the framework is, well, what's my perspective? What do I think about that? And how does that, do I agree with it? Do I disagree? Am I agnostic to it? So, and that's really important when it comes to the critical thinking is, well, how does this impact on my belief system? And if we, again, with that critical thinking workshop that I do, if you run this forward and you do start to look at sort of the less than good segments of the internet, you start to see how, the loss of the ability to think critically about what we're consuming, you end up in echo chambers, you end up in sort of down slippery slopes into less than savory content. And there's no way out because actually you're slowly having your belief system sort of influenced by what you're consuming. Yeah. And critical thinking is necessary to take a step back and go, well, what's the alternative perspective on that? What do I think? Yeah. And that's really important from a safety perspective, just as much as a learning perspective.
No, exactly. I completely agree. And I mean, that whole perspective is again, one of those things where walking into a conversation about social media usage, what I'm thinking of at the start of it is mainly just stuff like doom scrolling and, productivity, that kind of stuff. But it's scary in a way to see how far reaching the possible damage is, and like you said, with the critical thinking or the loss of it. And then how that affects you when you consume content, particularly things when it comes to body image and stuff like that, which is insane. And I feel like there's so much more left to kind of like go in and dissect when it comes to this kind of stuff. But the last question I'll ask is one that's a bit, it's personal to you. And it's the question is, throughout your whole journey, if you go right back to the rabbit factory,
the rabbit factory,
up until this point, what would you say is the biggest thing you've had to overcome, or the biggest challenge that you've had to overcome? And that could be through your education, through your own social media, relationship, through, the startup journey. What would you say is the biggest challenge, or one of the biggest? It's a very broad
challenges.
Broad question. I'm sure there are many challenges. What would you say is one of them that comes to mind?
I'm the person with the capabilities to deliver on something that has impact. I think, through my experiences, a lot of my confidence and self-esteem was stripped away, which is why, I feel quite passionate about this subject in particular when we do talk about young people. But, I've also worked really hard to build myself up to be the person I am today. And I've, crafted myself in a way and sculpted myself to become the person I am. And so overcoming that was really challenging. And one of the things that from my personal experiences is that I wanted to be the person that wrote my own story and not have my experiences dictate the story that I was living. And that involved me taking ownership of the things that had happened and sort of this passion for business that had been unfulfilled in my early 20s, and then a difficult relationship, and then dropping out of uni, and then coming back, like all of those things. I could, major on them in huge ways, and that could become sort of the reason why. And at the end of the day, those are things that just have happened, but I'm the person that has overcome them, and I'm the person that is able to deliver on a vision that's bigger than me and that has impact across hopefully lots of different generations. And that only comes through taking action. And you asked me what the biggest challenges was. The biggest action was to take action in the first instance and to actually do something to put myself out there. And then it got easier after that. And it's still challenging at different points, but it gets easier and easier as you build that momentum up. So if anybody is listening and they're experiencing a challenge in their life, take a step in the right direction, and it gets easier. And
it's the first step is hard, but then it just gets better and better the more stronger and confident you get. But that was just incredibly inspirational, I think, and it's a very remarkable journey. Even though you've only briefly touched upon it, and I think the whole journey itself deserves a book in and of itself. But thank you so much for talking to us today. That's it for today's podcast, and we'll see you guys next week. Thank you.